Hello, my name is Eric Butt, and I'm currently a student at Ball State University. I am studying music education, and I am studying the trumpet under Dr. Stephen Campbell. This is my Teacher Scholar Program project. This presentation will offer a general overview of the comparison of trumpet concepts explained in the method and technique books throughout history, spanning from the Baroque period to our current time. So, our first example of our books come from the Baroque period and the late Renaissance era, with Cesare, Bendinelli, and Girolamo Fantini. Cesare Bendinelli's book, Tutta l'arte della trombetta, was released in 1614 and is widely regarded as the first trumpet treatise released. And the book by Girolamo Fantini was released in 1638 called Modo per Imparare a Sonare di Tromba. And as you can see, we have two examples of the trumpet relevant at this period, which was the natural trumpet, and as you can see, there are no valves. So what is limited to this is just the harmonic series of the instrument. So if we discuss concepts and the source material between these books, we see that these examples serve as treatises to unify the common idea of how the trumpet is played. So what this means is that it basically identifies how the trumpet works and how it's played, which is through the mouthpiece by buzzing your lips. And at this time, the trumpet also served as a military instrument used to give signals from militaries, such as to saddle up horses or mounted musicians, which is very common at this period in time, as they were still using buglers. Music from these method books consisted of genres that were prevalent at the time, such as ricercares, sonatas, currentes, and caprices. There was also not a lot of science or understanding of the technique of the trumpet at this time, and that's because there wasn't much technology back then to help us understand that. So if we continue on with this presentation, we see that this is from 1638. This is Girolamo Fantini's book, Modo per Imparare a Sonare di Tromba, and we see that this is the method of beating with the tip of the tongue in different ways. Now, one can interpret this as different tonguing syllables that we can use to play these notes, or different syllables for tonguing in different pitch registers, which is how I'm interpreting it as. But it also doesn't make a lot of sense because ta is a rather open mouth sound, and if you want to play a rather higher note, such as G, the tongue arch should be raised in order to increase the pressure of air that is being released through the instrument. Another thing to consider is beating with the tip of the tongue is not as specific as it should be, because the tip of the tongue is not described as where it should be hitting in the mouth. And another thing to consider as well is that the tip of the tongue also beats the top of the mouth, and it's not necessarily the top of your tongue, it's rather the entire front of your tongue that is hitting the top of the mouth when you articulate. So, moving through the Baroque and Renaissance period, another significant period is the 1800s, with the development of the cornet and slide trumpet. And here we have my sources of the Cornopian Instructor by G. McFarlane, released in the 19th century, Thomas Harper Sr., with the instructions of his instrument with the slide trumpet, the keyed bugle, and other various instruments, and Thomas Harper Sr.'s School for Trumpet, which was also released in the 19th century. And here I have a picture of Thomas Harper Jr. playing the slide trumpet. So the 1800s offers more insight into how to play the trumpet, but is not necessarily well informed. It more or less serves as an instruction on how to do it, but rather than why someone should do it. And something to consider is that greater Western European influence had more influence on the instruction, as the introduction of the cornet changed a lot of the instruction, as well as the introduction of valves at this period. And here we have an example of instruction from the Cornopian Instructor by G. McFarlane. And what it says is, by blowing a little stronger and pressing the mouthpiece closer to the lips, the next note will be C. Now, this is correct in technically speaking of instruction, but someone may be confused when saying by pressing the mouthpiece closer to the lips. Now, it is correct that in order to play higher, more pressure will be needed, but pressure is not the main thing on higher notes. And it says on the contrary that you must do the opposite if you want lower notes. Now, if we follow a general rule that lower notes sound quieter than higher notes, then we must use more air in order to create a more stable sound when playing lower notes as compared to higher notes, because higher notes will sound naturally louder. So if we look at the various instruments at this period, we can understand the different methods of instruction. As we see here, the cornopian, as talked about from G. McFarlane, is a introductory instrument to the valved or piston instrument, along with the cornet. And as you can see here, we have the English slide trumpet, which was performed by the harpers. How it essentially works is it's not like a trombone, but it operates similarly to a natural trumpet. However, you can adjust the pitch with some diatonic adjustments using the slides. And we have the keyed bugle. The keyed bugle was used to play chromatic and diatonic notes in the military, and that is where the introduction of chromatic instruments in the trumpet world gets introduced. So moving through the 1800s, there wasn't necessarily a lot of change in the instrument. The trumpet does come into the trumpet that we relatively know now around the 50s, and it was being used a lot more in the 1920s, but a more significant period of growth in terms of trumpet instruction comes through the 1960s. And here we have my sources: Artistic Trumpet Technique and Study by Irving R. Bush, published in 1962, Trumpet Technique by Delbert Dale, published in 1965, The Art of Brass Playing by Philip Farkas, released in 1962, and Advanced Method for Trumpet by Robert Grocock, and released in 1968. So the 1960s brought a really significant development in trumpet technique, as research from brass musicians, such as The Art of Brass Playing, as we'll get to in a minute, significantly increases our understanding of proper technique through visuals and tools. Along with this is that there's a greater understanding of the muscles that are used in brass playing, such as the cheek muscles or our lip muscles that are used in our embouchure. Another thing is suggested practice routines are more developed and explained thoroughly, so there is more of a why we are doing something as a rather of how we are doing something. And something more significant is the concept of mouthpiece buzzing is emphasized in these method books due to the benefits of buzzing the mouthpiece. So I buzz the mouthpiece, and I find that it is very beneficial in my playing, so this is where this comes from. And as you can see, if we continue on, we have our methods of practice here. And if we look at the Irving R. Bush method from 1962, recommended studies for embouchure development is emphasized on the long tones and the buzzing, because the trumpet, the fundamental aspect of playing the trumpet is the long tone. And as you can see, long tones are emphasized in the beginning of this method by Irving R. Bush. And what we can see here is another method by Delbert Dale, is that he suggests technical exercise that involves single or double or triple tonguing exercises, flexibility exercises, attack exercises, and scales, register practice, difficult fingerings, or various articulations. Now, this is a very specific method of what someone can do in their instruction or in their individual practice. And if we look further with Irving R. Bush's method, it gives us breathing exercises and emphasize on the rest. Something that is not talked about is feeling fresh all the time and resting, along with buzzing the lips and playing on the mouthpiece. And just other aspects is that there is a common method for practicing with the long tones, slurred scales, intervals, flexibility, and range exercises. So around this period, there is a more descripted method of practice compared to just kind of telling someone what to do. There is more direction in this era. And continuing on, as I was stating previously with the tools, we have how I was stating with research is that there is a mouthpiece visualizer that is introduced at this period, which gives us a very good understanding of how the embouchure works and how the mouthpiece comes into play when playing the trumpet. As you can see, with the this is the Chicago Symphony Orchestra trumpet section from the 1960s. This gives us a really good insight of what a proper embouchure should look like when we're playing the trumpet. As you can see, the lips are kind of firm in the corners, and there's not a lot of puckering going on or not a lot of stretching going on, and the aperture is very smooth. It is very close together to create a very direct airflow in the instrument. So, moving on from the 1960s, we are moving on to the 1990s and current times. In this period, with my sources, we have Michael Sachs, who's the principal trumpet for the Cleveland Orchestra, and we have Allen Vizzutti, who is an international soloist, with his trumpet method books for the intermediate and advanced players, released in 1991. Now, something to consider here is that the 1990s brought an accumulation of the trumpet method that we now know of today. So with this accumulation of knowledge, instruction is very specific and beneficial to players, as it is given from the trumpet stars like Michael Sachs and Allen Vizzutti, who experienced their learning development through the 60s, which brought significant development to instruction, as we saw earlier, with more research-based and how things are done through the instruction. So if we are moving through this, as you can see, this is the table of contents from the Sachs method book, and it has an accumulation of everything from before. And one thing that I like about this, and I don't have a picture of this in here, is that it gives us a really good method of one way to practice, and that is through dissection. So, like taking an excerpt or a study and taking it down to the skeleton of it, so we get the basis of where things line up on the beats and where melodically and harmonically the music goes. And as you can see in the Vizzutti method, it has an overall accumulation of what we know today of how to practice the instrument and things to practice. So, wrapping up his presentation, the Baroque era brought an introductory and rudimentary understanding of the trumpet through Cesare Bendinelli's method and Girolamo Fantini's method. And the 1800s brought more development and more understanding on why something, on how to play the trumpet, but there was a little understanding why was at this period. The 1960s brought an incredible amount of understanding through the instrument, through research and visuals, through tools and exercises. In the 1990s brought the overall accumulation of trumpet method that we know of today, from trumpet stars through their learning from those from the 60s. So that is all I have for my presentation. Thank you.